world of football with a soccer perspective. This is Soccer Today with Duane, Rollins and Kevin Laramée, live on the Sports Podcasting Network.
Good day, good night. Welcome to Soccer Today for Wednesday, November 25th, 2020. And we are going to talk about the MLS Cup playoff. Welcome to the show. I'm Kevin Laramée, joined by Duane Rollins as always. Today on the show in the second half, we'll talk about Philadelphia being eliminated from the Major League Soccer playoffs. Also, LAFC, bye-bye. That's the second half. To start the show today, TFC, also, bye-bye. How are you doing today?
I'm well, thanks. I had to drop $150 on Christmas decorations yesterday. That was not necessarily my first choice to spend money, but
okay. First of all, if you went to the dollar store, you got $150 at Christmas. How big of a building are you decorating? If you went to the Bay,
half of that is the tree.
Okay,
so
good.
There is that. I got a Norfolk pine, which if you know what those are, they're kind of like Charlie Brown Christmas trees. They're little.
Okay, so you went with a real tree? You're a real tree kind of guy? Oh, that's a good question. I never had a real tree in my life.
Yeah, well, I decided to get because it smells the house up. You had nice pine smell. Although Norfolk pine is not actually a pine; it's like ironically named, but it lasts all year. Like you take the decorations off, and then you just have a little house plant. So there you go.
I would be good with the Charlie Brown tree, but those things come out every year, and they sold out in like minutes, so it's hard to get one. Just go take the ugliest tree you have in your backyard, put them on a pot plant, and you got yourself a Charlie Brown Christmas. All right, speaking of Charlie Brown Christmas. Someone whiffed on the ball last night. It was the entire team of TFC. And they lost their playoff game 1-0 to the expansion team of Nashville FC with Daniel Rios, USL product of Nashville SC, back in the day, scored a 109th minute to seal the 1-0 victory in extra time for Nashville. A lot of people are saying, oh, they had a lot of chances. They dominated that game. 3 goals were called back for offside, but they're not goals. There were 3 offsides that led to goals, if you want to think about it. They're not really goals. They were called back, and they were clearly offsides. But people were saying, and I kind of understand it a bit also, that Nashville maybe outplayed Toronto. If you watched that game, you understood exactly how this game was going to unfold. Nashville, the third best defense in Major League Soccer in the regular season, decided to bunker down, defend, and go for their opportunities on aerial balls, having the tallest player in that game. It almost worked. Who knew Zimmerman would almost score with like his feet late in the game, but they did get a late goal. It didn't come the way we would think, but Nashville comes out with the victory.
Yeah, look, two couple things there. I want to address the offside goal thing first, because first off, it's wrong to call it an offside goal. They were offside plays that because of the VAR rule, they allowed to continue on to their natural conclusion and then call back, which I hate. And I think most people agree with me on that front, whether you think that this was indicative of Nashville's vast outplaying of Toronto or not. I will say this. These weren't fingernail offside calls. These were clear as day offside calls. So in most, particularly the long breakaway one, that's without VAR getting called back right away. And I'm not sure why it wasn't anyway, because it was clearly offside. But regardless, they allow these things to come out, and then they look at them, and then they call them back and whatever. So I don't necessarily think you should look at that as part of the overall indication of the play. But what I will say is this, yes. Nashville does not play a pure low block. They do not purely park the bus. They also incorporate a lot of high press, not mid press, I'll call it, on the ball. They were attacking TFC's pretty much near the halfway mark. They weren't like pressing them in their own end, but they were pressing them pretty high up in the attacking zone to prevent TFC from really getting much through the middle, and they were staying very compact in the middle. And that combination forced TFC to really get the wing play going, and they just weren't. Richie Larea did not have the game that you've seen him have in the playoffs before. Piatti was invisible, basically. And because of that, you don't have Larea or Morrow had he been healthy, and you don't have Piatti opening up the sides, the flanks, then Pozuelo has to take too much on himself down the middle, and he doesn't get any open up. And then this is compounded by Josie starting, and Josie just looking like a shell of himself out there. In fact, like, I don't really remember much concrete attempts that Josie had. And normally he's in a playoff situation, he can be deadly. But, with a big body like that is broken down so much, 2017 was, in a relative sense, not that long ago, but in an athlete sense, it was. And he's just not that physical force anymore, particularly with the injuries he's had. And all that combined to allow Nashville to execute its game plan well. I am not a fan of how they play. I don't think there's a lot of neutrals that really would be a fan of how they play because it's not that exciting. It's defensive, it's organized, it's effective, it's a worthwhile and legitimate tactic. I am not saying otherwise. I am not cheering for them against the Crew because I don't like to watch that kind of soccer. Never have, never will. If you want to, go ahead. But yeah, it's I think this time of year, all those intangible stuff, which normally I'm not a fan of, matters a little bit more in 2020. And that is the other, big sort of unspoken about this too. And I hate using this term, but when you watch the way Nashville was pressing, particularly as that game got later and later and later, and they kept that energy up, that energy of that press up, they wanted it more. They had more to play for. TFC, they've been to 3 finals in 4 years. They've won things. They're an older team. They're away from home. All that stuff came into play. And if there are people listening to this that are going to be mad and think this is excuse making for them, sure, if you want to call it that. But there's, I've always said this before. I don't say it as much as some of the other stuff we say. Excuses are just another word for reasons. It's a reason for TFC to not play up to their expectations, and they didn't last night. And they were the deserving losers of the game.
They were indeed. And let's just go back to Altidore for a second, and then we'll talk about big picture. Where does this leave TFC for next year, for 2022 also? Now, looking at this lack of run in the playoff, but did finish second overall in the regular season behind Philadelphia for the Supporters' Shield. You find yourself in a one-off against Nashville, you lose. You talked about the decision of playing Josie off the start and how that could have led to being a mistake. What is the best way to handle Josie in that type of scenario? And how should Josie be handled going forward?
Biggest question the TFC has to deal with in this offseason. Of course, he is on contract. So, one of their choices is to do nothing and just bring him back and hope he's healthy, which that's like rinse and repeat, the same thing they've been doing for years. It worked once. And they won the championship when it did. But again, as I said a minute ago, that is getting on now in terms of the years that was. Look, Amendola should have started in my mind. And if you take a step away from your emotion, TFC fans, and look at TFC creating what chances they did, they were basically Amendola had the best. Well, Duane had that chance early. That goes in. That's a different game, but woulda, coulda, shoulda. But I think the Amendola little back heel flick when he first came on, sort of to me, was that he was just more energetic running on that line. And had he been doing that since the beginning, I think that would have put Nashville more on the back foot and allowed TFC to perhaps open them up, and then maybe they can find a goal. But Josie just didn't have that energy to run off the back line, and I think that at this point in time, I look at the season Amendola had, and I am confident and happy with the idea that TFC goes into 2021 with a younger roster, a refreshed roster, a roster that may not challenge for trophies next year, but will be building towards challenging for trophies in 22, 23, 24. And to me, that means that if you're looking at the Josie Altidore, a player who I think deserves the utmost respect of all TFC fans ever for the work that he has done when he has. His playoff form in 2017 was the reason they won the cup. Seba, we love him, but Josie won the cup for them in 2017. So he will go on that wall one day. He should. Well, they don't have a wall, but if they do create a wall, he'll go on it. They make a statue, he'd go out on it beside Seba. But I think that it might, in these early days, and I could change their mind, and TFC could be thinking different, but if they were tomorrow to announce that they are looking to sell him, which would be dumb because then they're going to drive his market value down, but if they were to do that internally, I wouldn't have a problem with it, and I don't think most TFC fans would have a problem with it, and I think most hardcore TFC fans, the TFC fans that are still paying attention in this weird 2020 season, I think most of them understand that it's time for a bit of a refresh. This isn't a bad team. They finished second overall in a weird season. But it's a team that didn't have that drive or that sort of edge that you saw the last few times, for the 3 of the last 4 years prior to this, right? They didn't have that edge, and I think you need to refine it, and you refine it by refreshing. They still have a lot of resources. They still have some core pieces there. They still have a player in Alejandro Pozuelo who is amongst the best players in the league. It's not going to be a bad team next year, but they might need to take a slight step back so they can leap forward the year after. And the run this team's had, guys, I'm speaking directly to TFC fans now, the run we've had, you should be okay with a little step back next year. You really should. It's been better than anyone should ever expect in Major League Soccer the last 4 years.
Yeah, for sure. And we're not going to have Toronto-Seattle this year. So there's some positives, at least, coming out of this defeat for the rest of us. But looking at other players here. I'm sorry?
You might have half of that matchup. I hope not, but we might have half of it.
Seattle looked really good. We'll get there with Raul. Don't call me Cisco with my silver hair, Rui Diaz. Yes, I did a Cisco reference. Thank you. You're welcome. And now let's continue looking at another player here. And you mentioned how 2020 was a weird season. Those were also the words coming out of the mouth of Michael Bradley, captain of Toronto FC, mentioning that 2020 was a difficult year for everyone. How do you view Michael Bradley going forward?
Best game he had all year last night. I know people are so torn with Bradley. He's on a good deal for the club, and he's not going anywhere. First off, he's going to retire with TFC and probably move into the coaching staff. So, what I do with Michael Bradley is, and I think that the frustration for some TFC fans will be the Liam Fraser situation. And look, I don't want to get into this too much this year, but Liam Fraser had opportunities, maybe not as much as people think, and he didn't play that well when he had them. So I'm not, and you can do chicken and egg with that argument. He didn't get enough chances to play himself into it, but I think that there's a little bit of passport bias happening when you're with many of the people that are saying that. I say this as someone who shares the passport, right? Like, we all want him to be successful. That doesn't mean he is. And if you objectively take a step back and look at Bradley's play last night, he was one of TFC's better players. He was effective doing the stuff that he does. What do I do with them? The reality is that Father Time, undefeated, is still going to keep ticking, and you do start to need to pivot out of that. Is Liam Fraser the answer? I mean, I think a lot of us hope he is, but if not, then you need to figure something out. I think you look at the way TFC played during its best stretch of the year. It was when Bradley wasn't in the lineup, and they had a double pivot back there with Rosario and Delgado. And we missed Delgado last night. Delgado is the most misunderstood player on TFC's roster, but I think his value was really shown by his absence. He does a lot of simple stuff out there that allows TFC to get its skill players more involved. So perhaps with Bradley, you've got to convince him to take a step back in terms of his playing time in the next few years so that he is fresh for those biggest games. He did show last night that he still can be a really effective player back there when he is playing well. But you're not going to move him. He's on a decent contract right now. He has played a lot on this club. I do think there is some leadership value for him, that intangible stuff in the room. I don't anticipate him going anywhere. Look, another question. I don't know if you were going to go with Piatti next. Do you have a question to answer with him too? He was on a 1-year deal. Do you want to just start fresh, get rid of Josie, get rid of Piatti, and have 2 DP spots open? These are all questions that we're going to have lots of time to figure out. Assumedly there's going to be a Voyageurs Cup game perhaps in the next couple weeks. We don't know how that's going to work out. I don't know. Like, the math just doesn't.
We'll see.
Calendar math just doesn't work.
And then a long off season for Toronto FC, which won't be that long, but it'll be like a full month for sure. Training camps will probably open mid-January, depending of course, the situation across the country and countries. When we're looking at Canada and the United States, that will influence when training camps and regular season does start in Major League Soccer next year. So Toronto FC will find itself with maybe the longest off season they had in a few years. Now, go ahead.
He'll be in the CCL though. I was going to say, so we don't know when that's happening.
Exactly. we just don't know when that is happening. Indeed, if it's going to be late February or mid-February like last year, then training camp starts mid-January and you find yourself with a month and a half off season, or you could have 2 month off season if you're Toronto FC. Now, last topic of TFC before we move on from that subject and take our break of the day, Duane. A lot of people are saying that they're not calling for his head at all, and I don't want to say that. That's not what I mean at all. But we're looking at maybe the closing of a window, the closing of a long window, a bay window probably for Toronto FC. They made 3 finals in the last 4 years. This is the 5th season of high soccer, I would say, like really good soccer, high quality soccer for TFC. The window's about to close. How do you handle that window going forward? Do you just continue with Greg Vanney and have him on for a 7th season and continue that road that you're on with him, which he deserves that with what he did? Does he want to do that? Does he want maybe to have another challenge? There's a lot of we've seen him doing it with Bezpachenko. Now it's Ali Curtis as GM of this team. There's a lot of how do you reinvigorate some energy into the team? And I've been watching over the last few weeks, of course, The Last Dance, and I know I'm late to the party watching this about the 98 Bulls, but I lived it, so I didn't need to watch it when it came out. I remember watching the Bulls in 98. But there's something to be said after winning and having a lot of success. Things need to be not shaken up. But if you go back to the Bulls after their first three-peat in 94, they had a difficult year. People wanted to retire. They were mentally exhausted. I feel a bit of that coming to Toronto. A bit of Michael Jordan after a 3rd championship kind of exhaustion. And how do you handle that exhaustion?
I strongly disagree with people who think that the answer to TFC's malaise for what it is, and it was, it's a 1-month malaise. They were doing pretty well in the summer. I strongly disagree with people who think that Greg Vanney is the reason for that. I believe in stability more than everything else in Major League Soccer, and moving him for the sake of moving him is just dumb in my mind. Like it's fanning. It's bad fanning. It's like, fire the coach. It's like calling in fan 590 at 11 o'clock at night after you've had too many beers kind of fandom. And it's not something I'm ever going to advocate for. Look, there's comes times to fire coaches. This is not it.
Sure. It wasn't really my question to you, but sure,
yeah,
we can.
Yeah. Well, no, I just want to get that out because it is always going to be around there. How do you do the refresh? Like I said, I think TFC is a club within the context of Major League Soccer that doesn't have to do a hard reset. And I don't believe you have to do a hard reset in Major League Soccer anyway. They can do a half reset. The DP slots are major factors in this. One of the things that they need to, if you look at the championship teams and you compare them to now, one of the biggest differences is I think that they had better luck, better performance by the TAM players back then than they are necessarily now. I do think you have a question, like I said earlier, about Piatti. Obviously we talked about Josie to ad nauseum at this point. Look, it's a funny season to evaluate. They did finish 2nd overall. And it's funny, I was having a conversation with someone last night. I didn't actually continue this with them on Twitter. I was going to actually mention it, but then I didn't want to, get argumentative last night. They referred to them winning the 1-goal games in the summer as luck, but that losing 1-goal games now was an indication that they're bad. Well, there's a disconnect there, right? Like, you can't say that you were only lucky when you won them, and it's really truly indicated when you lose them. It could just be that that's where they're at. There was something missing in the attack this year, for sure. And you have to address that because they're not solid enough at the back to lock things down to win like Nashville does. They need to score goals. And when they were performing that way, they were a very dangerous team. So maybe just like in 2018, they came back to MLS Cup final after they lost in 2018, right? Maybe that's the answer. Although that was not a smooth season. If the end was, but it wasn't great till then. They have to refresh the roster. They have to get a little younger. They have to maybe get some players in that are new to the message. I think there's, forgive this comparison, but there is relative comparison to like Puppet City too. Like they're going through something right now that I think is going to require a complete turnover of players. I think it's not a complete turnover at TFC, but some, if they're going to get back there. This is not a bad team. And to panic is dumb at the moment. But especially
one thing that I was trying to get across with you is not necessarily panic or anything like that. Is, do you think there's an exhaustion after multiple years of high level of quality soccer, deep playoff run, deep run in other championships too, and Leagues Cup and Campeones Cup? Is there an exhaustion here? How do you handle that exhaustion, that mental exhaustion that comes after years and years of success?
Turnover, I think, if there is an exhaustion. I think the exhaustion was to do with COVID, and no one has control over that. I guess, yeah, how do you handle it is you have to give them rest, and you have to maybe not go for a supporter shield, and perhaps they were pushing a little too hard for points in the regular season this year and weren't setting themselves up for the playoffs in a way that they did the last year. Like 2019, if you look at how they played 2019 out and compare it to this year, it's nice to chase this shield. It is fun to watch and it is exciting from a fan perspective, but it isn't necessarily beneficial to the club to be trying to win that much each week. You do have to, I think, balance that a little bit. It's very rare in Major League Soccer you see teams that are good enough to pull off doubles. We saw one with TFC, and perhaps that blinded them. Like, they're not going to be that good, maybe ever again. That's just the reality of it. That's depressing, but that's the reality of it, right? That's a special team. And to push as hard as they did in the regular season, particularly with the circumstances around it this year, maybe that was a mistake. Maybe they needed to rotate more. Maybe they needed to rest more. And, maybe certainly they ended up being forced to rotate during the end. I don't know the answer to this. I do think some fresher faces, and we talked about, again, I'm going to go back to Josie for a third time. I think maybe that's your ultimate example of it. I don't know if the team is exhausted. Josie does not look like he's engaged right now, and that could be exhaustion. That could be mental and exhaustion. And he's talked openly about how the world around him has affected him, and not just COVID. We're talking about BLM stuff too. How as a black man, he is just more engaged in that now than he is mentally than he is in soccer. And that's, as a human, it's perfectly acceptable. But as a footballer, TFC has to evaluate whether they are getting their most value for him. That's a very cold way to look at it, but they have to as their asset, right? And if maybe he'd be happier, he talked about buying RSL. Maybe he'd be happier doing a project like that at this point where he felt that he was doing more, and maybe TFC can accommodate that. It might help Josie, and it might help them. And that I honestly think the more I talk about it, that the biggest question, the biggest thing they need to deal with is that 240-pound weight Josie
striker
that they have.
And we'll have time to look at what to do with Josie in the coming few months for TFC for sure. No Canadian teams left in the playoffs, but we'll keep on following MLS Cup playoff because that's what we do, and we'll continue right after this short break. We'll talk about LAFC Seattle. We'll talk about Philly New England right after this.
You are listening to Soccer Today. Follow us on Twitter at SoccerTodaySPN and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Sports Podcasting Network. You can find the podcast version of all the shows we do on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Google Play Store, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, and anywhere you get your podcast.
Duane?
Yeah?
We have to change the subject of the show right now.
Okay.
The soccer world just lost what apparently would be a big name. Diego Maradona apparently passed away at 60 years old.
Oh, wow. Okay. That's unfortunate. It is clearly, obviously, one of the best players. I think he is maybe the best player I've ever saw. I'm not old enough to remember Pele in his peak, but I do kind of remember Maradona. We all know he didn't live a healthy life after he retired, but that's... a sad case, the character gone.
Yes, and this is unconfirmed. I'm not saying it's true. I'm not saying it's breaking news. It's just something that I've been pointed to, and it's the number one trending topic right now on Twitter. So it's out there right now. We'll have more information on that tomorrow. If this is the case, tomorrow will be a special show that we will look on Diego Maradona's life in more detail for sure. Now, pivoting back to LAFC, I do want to talk about Seattle, LAFC, and New England, Philly. Let's quickly touch on Philly and New England. I don't want to spend too much time here, but it is a similar situation where a team haven't played in 16 days, 14 days for Toronto, 16 for Philly, heading into the playoff game, and the team with the momentum, the team with a game just 4 days, 5 days before got the best out of the team that haven't played in 2 weeks. Toronto lost to Nashville after not playing for 2 weeks, and Philly lost to New England after New England did play on Friday. And that's kind of like the best of both worlds. In New England, you played but 5 days ago, so you had time to recover and get ready. And if you're New England, you haven't played in 16 days and you lost that rhythm. So for Philly, they lost that rhythm. New England had that rhythm, just played against Montreal last Friday. So that is a bit of a narrative, at least. It happened twice, and even if we're looking at Seattle, LAFC, both teams haven't played, so that doesn't really count there. During the Western Conference, it was different. There was no play-in matches. But if we're looking at the Eastern Conference, for sure, that had at least some influence in the result of TFC Nashville, and for sure in Philly, New England.
Yeah, well, it had been 16 days from decision day till the games that Toronto and Philly played last night. So that's a very long break, and under any circumstances, you add in the international break in there, which means not so much in Toronto's case, but in Philadelphia's case, they were missing some players that couldn't even train at the same level. In Toronto's case, they had to deal with the border a couple times too, so it wasn't an ideal situation for either. We've said this many times, though. There's no such thing as fair in 2020 sports. There's only doable, and this was what was doable. So they had to sort of work it into their schedule. I do think that there is definitely a factor involved there. I thought, and I even tweeted about it, that it was an advantage for both Philadelphia and Toronto to play these games with so little rest for the other two teams. But on hindsight, I might revoke that and say that maybe it wasn't, that the layoff was more the factor than the short turnaround from the Friday games. Gave them the rhythm back, right? And even, look, LAFC, which we'll talk to in a minute, didn't look great either. Seattle, by virtue of playing a team that wasn't looking great, we don't know. We'll have to see what they look like on the weekend, and that's sort of where we're at there. But yeah, from a Philadelphia Union perspective, look, they got the Shield, so that's good for them, and they'll celebrate that. But we all know that the MLS Cup matters to these teams more. And so to lose this after the season they had, it has got to be a really big blow to them, particularly to a New England team that has not played well all year and was not even playing well going into the playoffs either, particularly. And they dropped down to the 8th seed. Someone was joking that it would be highly hilarious if New England finally won its MLS Cup after going in as a seed that would never make the playoffs in any other year. I kind of like that narrative on some weird 2020 funny way, but nonetheless, we'll see. And one of either New England or Orlando is going to be in the Eastern Final.
Sure, that is unexpected, to say the least. So maybe not New England, but Orlando for sure. That's gotta be an indication of how good of a job not only Pereira but the team itself of Orlando were able to continue to keep on momentum. There's always one team a year in Major League Soccer, Duane, that starts the year better than we think and keeps that going. Philly was 2 years ago, and we all thought, remember? Actually, it was the last year. Remember where you and I were like every month, we're like, oh, Philly's still up there. They're going to go down eventually, and they kept it up there. Orlando was that team this year, and they got the fortunate result in the weirdest penalty kicks of all time in Major League Soccer. We'll see how that affects their next matchup, but yeah, you're onto something.
Yeah, and there's usually one team that starts slow, and we all think they're going to get better, and that never happens, and we're going to talk about them next.
LAFC, well, they were 7th. They made the playoffs.
Yeah,
but you had Vancouver, and you had other terrible teams, too, in that part. So
a 7th seed for that club with that talent is not successful in any way at all.
Oh, no. That, like, imagine. Okay, first of all, Diego Rossi, Rodriguez were injured. Well, were injured. Had COVID, so they were not available for this one, which did influence the result for sure of this game. But 3-1 at the end of the night with the worst penalty kick I've ever seen, probably. Like, worse than Baggio in 94. Worse shout out to Alex Fedorczewski for tagging me on that one. And worse penalty kick than Ali Adnan even with Vancouver last year. That's how bad Vela's penalty kick was. I don't know what he was thinking about. And it's Vela's second PK like this that I've seen he missed for LAFC, and it was very similar. It's like he thinks he's so much better than the keeper. He thinks he has his mental game gone so good. He thinks I'm going to psych him out, and then just did the worst in the middle penalty kick I've ever seen. This is so Vela.
It wasn't a Pianca even. It was what?
Pass? It was a pass to the keeper? Pass to Stephen Fry?
Yeah, the keeper shouldn't catch a damn penalty. To catch a penalty as a keeper, think about this for a minute. They're guessing to a little level, right? Not only do you have to guess the right way and see what they're doing and anticipate what they're doing, but you have to understand at some point during that kick that you don't need to punch it.
And you don't need to move. You can just stay there and underhand, basket catch it. If this was baseball, that's a Willie Mays underhand catch, right? He literally scooped the ball up. That was the worst penalty kick I've ever seen. Compared to the professional penalty kicks we saw, Dallas and Portland? Was it Dallas, Portland? Anyways.
Yeah.
It was that were super, well done, every single one of them. Yeah, this ain't it.
Yeah, no, 8-7, that one. I was baffled by it. It was I had to, when I watched it, I had turned the sound down because I had another thing on. I was, trying to dewind from the TFC game. So I had the game on watching it, but I looked at it 3 times and rewound it to go, did I just see that? What the hell did I see? Was that a replay from the worst penalties of all time? No, it was just terrible. And I kind of, when that happened, I was like, okay, I don't really need to pay too much attention to the rest of this game because LA ain't winning this at this point. And sure enough, there was at no point that they had any pushback on the game. And obviously Rossi and the rest missing doesn't help, but I don't think they were there anyway. It was just a team that never found its way, and part of that is they were missing their big center back too, that they moved to a guy that Walker Zimmerman is going to play an extra game this year than LAFC. So who won that trade?
Well, I could have told you that a long time ago that Walker Zimmerman and Nashville won that trade, but they officially did won that trade for sure.
Real quick on that, I mean, we said this before, and it's belaboring a point, but I know Bob Bradley is quote-unquote soccer genius, right? And I know also Bob Bradley wouldn't have made that choice on his own. But that is just dumb. That's a bad MLS move. When you have a guy like Walker Zimmerman or Chad Marshall back in the day or Drew Moore at times or name any of these MLS lifers that are center halves, you do not get rid of them. That never. And I think it's tempting for these players, particularly Major League, or these owners and these managers and in Major League Soccer to go, well, we got this big asset that people really want. We can get a flashier player in, and that will sell tickets, and that will, we'll score goals, and we'll do that. And in general, as I've said many times, offense is what wins the championship in Major League Soccer. But you have to have that core in the middle. You have to have, like Drew Moore, I just mentioned, he was every bit as big a part of that 2017 team as any other player was, right? You need that piece, and they had that piece, and they were winning the Supporters' Shield, and they should have won MLS Cup last year. They should have. They had one game that went the wrong way. They got a bad bounce. That was the epitome of a bad bounce, of a luck loss to Seattle last year. And they decide to move that piece. That's just overthinking.
and they lose to Seattle again this year. But the funny thing, though, when we look at LAFC's entire body of work in 2020, if you want to look at the roster of LAFC throughout the 2020 season, also it evolved a lot, and it's crazy how long ago this feels. But Ado Diamante's personal issue and then leaving the sport, that's a big deal. Right? That did a big blow. That was a goal scorer for them. BWP was there to maybe be his second, his backup, because we know he had some injury problem. in the past, a back problem and some leg problems. So we knew he was not going to play a lot of games, but then you find himself not with him this season. The Zimmerman trade that happened pre-COVID, so it happened before things changes, before you lose also Diomande and other players, and before you have Vela not available for most of the season, which, if you talk about Diomande and Vela, for most of the season you didn't have them. That's a lot of goals you didn't get. And you have other pieces that are not there. MAK got injured at some point, which is always a bad news for LAFC. When MAK is not playing, they have a losing record. So there's a lot of compounding small details that at the end of the year, in a one-game situation, add COVID, and Rossi's not there, and Blessing not playing the same interesting way. Yes, he does bring some danger when he plays as a fullback, but he doesn't bring the same energy throughout the last third in the entirety of the match. So there's a lot of small compounding decisions that failed, that amassed for this loss against Seattle last night. Again against Seattle last night.
Yeah, look, and it illustrates the fine line that is Major League Soccer, even when you have a roster as strong as LAFC, and it is strong, and they're not going to fall into the wilderness. They will absolutely be one of the contending teams at the start of 2021. So that's not panic there, but it shows how much single moves and single injuries and little tweaks here and there can take what seems like a juggernaut and derail it. And it's, to steal Carl Robinson's line again, that fine line is legit. They were they were a bad bounce away from winning MLS Cup, really, and doing a double last year. And now, who knows whether they'll get back. Quickly, Kevin, Sky Sports now reporting, confirming what you said a moment ago, that Diego Maradona has in fact passed away.
So tomorrow on the show, we will have a large portion of the show dedicated to Maradona. Duane, it's the first time we lose such a legend since we're doing the show, which we've been going on for a long time. So I guess we were fortunate for a while. Diego Maradona has passed away of a heart attack on just a few hours ago. It is now November 25th. It's 11:42, and it has been confirmed that Diego Maradona has passed away.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, and well, you said it's been a long time since we lost a legend like that, and it's hard to lose a legend like that because, and we'll reflect on this more. Maybe we'll see if we can find a guest. There aren't many legends like that. This is absolutely a top 5 player of all time in the world. I don't think there's any debate about that. You can argue your spots 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but he's in that top 5. There's no doubt.
Yeah, and we're not going to start naming it. That would be a bit disrespectful.
A little too soon. A little too soon for that.
Exactly. Yeah. We'll talk about that on another month. Tomorrow will be a special show dedicated to Diego Maradona. We'll look a bit more in his career. We'll look at his time with Napoli. We'll look at his time across also different periods. And he had some amazing stories across the years of friendlies played in America, befriended people across the world. We'll talk about the good times tomorrow on Soccer Today with Diego Maradona passing away. The world of football lost a legend today on November 25th. And tomorrow we'll look at Diego Maradona's career. We'll also look at his life, a flawed genius that did have a lot of demons until the end. And we'll look at all the good moments and some not that great of Diego Maradona's career. A genius on the pitch, known for great moments and great controversial moments in the history of the game back in the days where it was truly the most watched anything in the world. But until then, for Duane Rollins, I'm Kevin Laramée, and we're going to see you tomorrow. On that note, we'll a minute of silence.